you're in a good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I want to begin to identify relationship wedges, what they are, and how they show up. And the use of these wedges are very interesting because I find that many times, even the people that create the wedge and throw it out there don't actually always know why they're doing it. Sometimes it's subconscious. It's part of their programming. And a lot of times it's part of their programming to keep a distance from a loved one, a friend, or in a relationship. And this wedge that this person can create, and think about when you're thinking about wedges in a relationship wedge is anything that has the potential to drive you and someone you care about apart. And these wedges are very interesting, and a wedge in a relationship can be many different things. So it's not just one thing. It can be many different things that can create a wedge. And some of the most interesting things you wouldn't think of that can create a wedge do create a wedge and can be used so for that exact purpose, so that the person is able to create some sort of emotional distance and find fault in that other person as well. So in today's show, we're going to be talking about that, as well as how some of those wedges can actually be forever ammunition. And so a wedge could actually be something that actually is living, or an actual object, or a situation, or something to do with that. It can also be a situation that took place, a past situation. Whether that situation is completely true or fabricated even can be a wedge too. So some of the things that we don't even realize can be a wedge. Something can wedge a relationship and create that wedge, even something that might not be completely true, or something that maybe didn't even take place in the first place, but it took place in someone's head, and so it's believable, and so that person acts from that as well. So we're going to be talking about that in today's show as well, exploring that information, exploring those concepts, because those concepts are kind of things that, well, we don't always explore, and we might not even be aware that it exists, and being able to understand and diagnose to a degree as far as, okay, here, I see this. Okay, this looks to be like an emotional wedge that's being created. Now, why is that? It's because this person subconsciously or consciously wants to stay away emotionally and wants to create the division so that there's a constant problem, so that there's an easier chance of moving on or an easier chance of getting out of the relationship. And that can be based on many different things, because a person could be feeling smothered. Those types of things, want to get out of the relationship. But there's a lot of different reasons why. So let's start with the first one that I'd like to talk about. And that is the concept of how a person or an animal can actually be the wedge in a relationship. The person or an animal. And let's talk about that. So, for example, maybe someone's in a relationship, and the person in the relationship, doesn't particularly like that the other person had a child in a previous marriage, and that child is used as the wedge. And let me give an example. Well, here you are hanging out with your kid again. It's always about your kid. It's everything we have to do is around this kid. Oh, here we go. We're going to take the kid out again. It's that constant, okay, they're using that person, which happens to be a child, as the wedge, creating the pain part based on the problematic situation that this child brings to the table. Now, a lot of times that comes from jealousy, from one person being jealous of a child in a relationship. And when it happens, a lot of times it can be a little overwhelming, because you're not expecting an adult to be jealous of a child. And so that can be kind of a little off-putting as far as not recognizing that that's happening. But that child can be literally that wrench. I've also seen where, people have been previously married, they have adult children, and those adult children are now having grandchildren, as far as parents are becoming grandparents, and the children are now becoming the parents. And when, the grandparents are wanting to see the children, and, they're not the children of the current spouse. They're not the exact children of the other spouse. The current spouse gets angry, upset that the other person is taking time out to see their kids and taking time out to be at the hospital for the birth of the grandchildren. And this can be challenging too, because it can be an all or nothing thing. Well, if you're going to continue to hang out with your family, or you got to go see your kids, or you got to go acquiesce to your ex-wife. The ex-wife can be a wedge. I see how you still talk to her. The ex-husband can be a wedge. I see how you still talk to him. And that's really hard when you're dealing with folks that don't understand that, to some degree, if you've been married and you have children, even if you have dog children or cat children, but most definitely when you have, human children, you're going to have to be in contact with that person a little bit, at least to discuss the children and the situation. And it's hard because sometimes you might be in a relationship with someone that doesn't understand that. And so the past wife or past husband becomes this permanent wedge in the relationship, where anytime something is going wrong, they bring up, oh, here you go, you're going to talk to your ex-wife again. Oh, here you go, I see you, you're on the phone with your ex-husband. You still have feelings? What's going on? Should we just go on and break this up right now? This is insane. I wouldn't talk to my ex. Another wedge that I find is very interesting that many of you might not even be aware of is the wedge that can be used with a cat or a dog. Even a bird, for that matter. Even a pet pig can be a wedge. In multiple different ways. For example, the dog, the cat, the bird, the pig. Maybe that one person doesn't want to leave that pet. And I understand that. I love my dog, and I want to take my dog Buddy everywhere. And he's here, in the studio right now as we're doing this show. But sometimes it gets to almost an unhealthy way where the person literally has to have that dog, cat, pet, pig, bird in the house right next to them at all times. And I've even had some clients tell me about how the dog or cat has to be in between them at all times, even in bed all the time, and how that's kind of become an absolute wedge as well. And see, again, it's like the animal, even though the animal doesn't really understand what's happening, the animal is being used as a wedge in the relationship to create an emotional wedge. And this is very powerful stuff that I'm talking about, because many of us are not even aware that this is happening in our own life. Many of us are not aware that it's happening at all, period. And these types of things are very interesting to discover and unravel. A lot of this, too, is like when you're dealing with a person, a child that's a wedge, or a dog, cat that's a wedge, that's something that's not going to go away. So that's something that's either being used as a deflection piece, that's either being used as a defensive piece, that's either being used as a forever ammunition. It's always about your kids. You don't care about me. Your kids are always first. It could be the other flip side, where it's like, I love my dog more than I love you. And I'm not going to let this dog out of my sight. And, the dog comes first. And I love animals, But again, thinking about that from that perspective and how that would make another person feel, especially if the other person you're married to might feel a little slighted in the fact that, the dog comes first. And that's fine. For many of us, our animals are always family. But think about it from that perspective. And that wedge is going to be there, whether the wedge is being put in by someone else or we are creating that wedge. And so many of us can be on one side or the other of this equation in today's show. I've also realized that health issues can create a wedge. And so when somebody's gone through a health issue, they can use that as a way of not getting intimate. They can exploit that health issue to the nth degree to use that so that there's not any sex or interaction. There's a lot of folks out there that, I understand back pain. I've had a lot of back pain in my life. I've had spinal surgeries. I get it. And I feel bad for anybody out there that has back pain. I'm not judging. I'm not getting down on you. But some people do have back pain, but some people might be using that a little bit more to not have intimacy, to blame it on the back pain. Many of y'all have gone through, health issues that it might affect you, but you don't let it affect your relationship. And I'm talking about when we allow it to affect our relationship, especially intimacy and connection, that's a wedge. On the flip flop, if you have someone that you're dealing with that, the health situation that they're dealing with has become this like kind of elephant in the room where there is no kind of touch or anything like that, that can be really challenging overall. That can be very challenging overall because it's the constant thing. When you come in, you try to give them a hug, oh, this or that, or you forgot about this, or, that really hurt. And it can be challenging. I mean, there are some people out there that the touch can be painful to some degree, but also it's probably painful on the other side when someone's not able to have touch and can't touch because of the other person as well. And so these health issues can run amok as far as the wedge is concerned. And again, these are things that you just don't know. Is it the person that's going through this much pain? Is it really the much pain that they're going through? And the pain is at such a level that they can't deal with it. And so they can't deal with the pain. And then therefore this, they feel this way. And if that's the case, sure. But sometimes I feel like it is, extremely painful. And other times it's a way of creating that division so that they don't have to feel that feeling or go through that situation in general, which is very interesting. And I found that especially during throughout COVID was used as a massive wedge with a lot of people as well, especially in friendships, family dynamics, and relationships. And I understand, it's important to stay well. However, some people took this to the extreme and divided up families for years. Some people took this to the extreme of not allowing some people to go see their kids from other marriages because using the concept of COVID as the wedge. There are some people that also are married where the house was divided in half and plasticed up and separated, and because one person worked, the other person would not see them unless they were masked and on the other side of a plastic wall. Again, the COVID became the wedge. And the thing is that the wedge usually is guised as something else, right? Because the wedge is guised in a person, a place, a thing, a sickness, an illness. And usually there's so much stress or anxiety or feelings or emotions wrapped up in it, it's really hard to point out what's going on. And if you're having the wedge given to you, so if you're on the receiving end of this wedge, that can be overwhelming too, because when you're trying to point it out, you might be fighting back instead of being able to just show the truth of what's really going on and being able to express your feelings, which can be very painful and then can continue the argument even more so than necessary. Like when we keep pushing that envelope, we're allowing the argument to continue, which is allowing this behavior to continue as well. So stay tuned. I'll be talking more about different types of wedges, how to deal with it and how to understand it, and how to know if you're going through this, because this is something that you need to know. Stay tuned. Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I'm exploring the concept of the emotional, mental wedge that many people are creating in relationships to be able to manipulate and control the situation. It's interesting, like I was talking about earlier, the concept of a wedge being a child or another person or a friend or a pet. All of these living creatures can be wedges when used to be a wedge. So, for example, the child from the previous marriage that the new spouse has an issue with. that can be a wedge. And every time the husband or wife goes to see their kiddo from the previous marriage, it's brought up, oh, you're always spending time, you're always doing this, where are you? I never get to see you, you're always constantly doing this. And so it becomes this wedge, and then it becomes kind of this resentment piece, and then it's brought up numerous times over and over again in any sort of argument or fight about how you spend too much time with your kid, or how the kid's using you, or how you're spending too much money on the kid, or how you have to interact with the baby mama or the baby daddy, and how that's impacting the current situation. And so there's this constant barrage. The health issues is an interesting thing too, because I know that a lot of people have health issues, and I understand for sure. And I understand how they can impact us in our day-to-day life. I also understand how they can impact us in relationships, and I get that. However, sometimes the impact is not as impactful as some of us claim, right? So we create this wedge based on, I have this health issue, don't touch me. Oh, my back hurts, I can't have sex, like constant something that's going on that gets in the way of having connection with the other person, that gets in the way of having that intimacy, and that's a big deal. So that's something that a lot of times people are not aware of. And then sometimes it can be really challenging to somebody, because if it's being used constantly, it can make the other person feel small. It can also make the other person feel as though they're very unattractive or not wanted. There's lots of different levels to this that can come into play when that happens. COVID is an interesting thing, and that was what I was really talking about right before the break, was just COVID, and how COVID, yes, I understand COVID, but COVID was used as a great divider and a big wedge with a lot of people. And there was a lot of people that said, hey, okay, we're going to get together anyway, even if we need to go outside or whatever, but we're going to make sure that we keep the family together to some degree. But there was other folks out there that were like adamant about not, and COVID became the big deal, and they separated families from it, or they didn't see, they wouldn't allow their spouses or, to go see other people or to do things. And, there's some that actually divided the house up in plastic and wouldn't even, kiss or hold their spouse anymore. And the COVID became the wedge. And there's some people that are still living this life right now where COVID is the big wedge in the relationship, where the person can't go to work and come back home and see their spouse. Or connect with their spouse unless they're outside and a few feet away with a mask on. And that's really challenging. And I understand that there's some people that are dealing with some PTSD from getting COVID, and maybe the COVID was extreme, and I totally understand that. However, when we're living in fear like this for a long period of time, and then the relationship is suffering through this as well, that wedge becomes, catastrophic. Emotionally, mentally, physically for the other person, and spiritually for that matter, because you begin to question the reality of the relationship as well. The forever ammunition is a big piece too, and that's a big wedge creator, is forever ammunition. And so what I've been talking about so far is wedges in general, but there's a forever ammunition that can go a long way to creating a wedge. And this forever ammunition is stuff that we can bring back up in an argument to be able to separate things, to bring back up in an argument, to stop the argument in its tracks, bringing it back to the forever ammunition. So when I return, I'll be talking more about forever ammunition, how to spot forever ammunition, and what we can do about it. Stay tuned. Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time. In 2 shakes.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I'm talking about the wedge that people put in the way of the relationship, that gets in the middle of the relationship, that causes problems, that causes chaos, that allows for this emotional distance. And a lot of times it's happening, and sometimes people that are doing it don't even know they're doing it. Sometimes I think to some degree they might know they're doing it, and definitely subconsciously we all know we're doing it. So, it gets to that point. But, self-awareness is self-awareness, and sometimes we might even, some people that are self-aware might not be aware of what's happening. Right before the break, I was talking about how, COVID and how a lot of that was used to separate family dynamics as well. And that was the wedge that was put in there between family and friends and even spouses in the same household. And now I want to really talk about the forever ammunition concept, because the wedge can also come in the form of forever ammunition. And I've talked about that. I'm actually the one that's coined that phrase years ago. I kind of came up with that. I should copyright it, I guess. But I haven't yet. But the forever ammunition concept is when somebody uses stuff against you from the past and brings it up over and over and over again. And the stuff keeps coming up, keeps coming up, keeps coming up. And it always comes up, seems to always come up, anytime that you bring up something that the other person's done. So let's say that the other person's done something that is not cool, not nice, not good, and you bring it up. You go, hey, you're not bringing it up in a mean way. It's, hey, really didn't like the way that you acted or the way you treated me or da-da-da-da-da or whatever. And the other person goes on and they starts arguing, and the next thing you know, well, what about that guy you talked to on the beach? What about that guy? What about that conversation you had for all that time? What about that, the flip the script? What about that woman you talked to? What was all that about? And they bring it up in the middle of this entire situation. And it's very interesting how this happens, because it's used to get you off target. It's used to change the subject. It's used to be able to manipulate the situation into something that took place a while back. And I find it very interesting, because those same things can be used year after year, argument after argument, and it seems to work for many of us because we fall trapped to it, right? We fall trapped in the fact that we argue back. Oh my God, that was 15 years ago. Oh my God, you're still bringing that up. It was it was just an innocent conversation, and you're going to bring this up from 15 years ago. And we're going to, oh, what do you mean 15 years ago? You're probably doing it yesterday. I just don't know. It's probably behind my back. That's just the kind of person you are. You are. That's what you are. You're just a flirt. You're just like, you're a sneak. You see what I'm saying? And then it grows, and then all of a sudden we get defensive, right? We get defensive. We get angry. The argument accelerates, and then what? We have no solution. The concept and the thing that you brought up that you wanted to talk about in the relationship, it's so far away from that now. It's so far away, you can't even bring it back. Now we have an argument, full-on argument, no solution, no closure, no middle ground. And all we have is a concept of what happened 15 years ago. And that's challenging. I know that some folks have talked to me and emailed me about this ammunition. They said, oh my God, when you said that on a couple of YouTube videos years ago, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And some people wrote to me and said, their forever ammunition was so far back that it even happened before they got in a relationship with this person. So let me explain. I had one person write me a letter and say that they were dating somebody before the relationship they got in, and then once they got in this relationship, they were talking about the person was asking them questions about their previous relationship. And they had said that they had talked to somebody on the phone during the relationship. They had met somebody on the phone, but they never, hooked up or anything, but they had talked to somebody on the phone, and they had felt bad about it. And then this person that they get in a relationship with ends up using it against them. Well, you basically cheated on your previous ex, and started using that as forever ammunition in the current relationship. And you see what I'm saying? It's like you disclose things about your life in this forever ammunition concept is how it's used, right? So they ask you questions, you disclose, because now you're in this relationship with this person and you feel confident that it's good. Then you disclose your situations to them, and then they use it against you as forever ammunition to find fault in you and to find a reason to paint you black. Many of you are also in relationships right now where you're dealing with what I call the narrative. So we have the narrative that can be really challenging to overcome. And so you might be dealing with a situation right now in a relationship where the narrative has become bigger than life. It's all about the narrative. The narrative is what that person is claiming that you did, what that person is claiming that you did. And that is challenging. And sometimes that claim can be far from reality. Now, sometimes that claim can have glimpses of reality in it, right? And I'm not talking about when the claims are real. I'm talking about when the claims are fabricated. It's a narrative, and then you're dealing with fighting against a narrative. And fighting against a narrative is really hard because it's like fighting against a person's dream. You know, a dream is a dream. It's not reality. And it's like, you know, when somebody feels that you dream cheated, they wake up and they go, you're a jerk. You were cheating in my dream. Okay, well, you know, I can't control the fact of what you dream about. And the fact that you had that dream doesn't mean that I'm a cheater. And now I'm going to have to sit there and argue about how I'm not a cheater, and I'm going to have to prove to you that that wasn't true, the thing that happened in your dream. And dreams are very literal, by the way, and so it's not always just because you dream that somebody's cheating doesn't mean that they're necessarily cheating. Dreams are extremely literal, and it's something that I love to interpret. Dream interpretation is something I love to do. But when you think about this, it's like fighting someone's narrative is like fighting their dream. It's created and manufactured. And many of you are having to deal with that type of forever ammunition where you're fighting up against the narrative that you can't win against, even though it didn't happen. Even though it didn't happen. And that's what I want you to think about. That's what's so critical here. That's what's so critical here, because if you're dealing with something like that, for example, maybe there was a night when somebody got physical and you were involved, but you didn't touch the other person, and they got hurt in the process of kind of basically trying to hurt you, they might recreate the narrative as so, that you were involved in the altercation, that you started the altercation. Sometimes the way that people remember things are the way that they choose to remember things. I've worked with clients, where the truth was the truth, and then a couple of days later, the narrative was completely changed, and in a year later, it never happened. Even though there were witnesses and even police reports, apparently it never took place. So it's a very interesting spot to be at when we're in the middle of something like that, where that's being used as forever ammunition and the wedge. So the fight that didn't take place, or the thing that you didn't do, becomes this wedge, and every time you're having to have a conversation with them, or you'd like to communicate with them in a healthy way, they bring up the thing that you didn't do, and then you're over there trying to argue the fact that you didn't do it. Part of you wants to just agree to it because you want to get past it, but I'm telling you right now, if you agree to things like that you didn't do, that's a slippery slope, and that's a lie. So if you didn't do something, why are you agreeing to the fact that you did it? And what happens there is that it doesn't end there. I know that you think, okay, if I just agree that happened instead of the way it did, she or he will drop that story. Well, no, normally that's not the case, because then they're going to say, well, what else do I not know? Or what else are you doing that I need to know? All these things are very interesting. So I want you to think about that. So be careful before you before you say that you did something you didn't do. Be mindful and aware that this is probably not going to gain you any points. You might actually lose more points. And then by you agreeing to that, they can go around and tell everybody about it later on. But these fights are very interesting. The possibility of cheating. There's a lot of folks that use that wedge for cheating. Oh, I know you're a cheater. Your dad is a cheater, and you're going to be a cheater. I mean, that's pretty terrible when people say that kind of stuff, based on things that your parents did, is the fact that, oh, now because they cheated, you got to be a cheater. I mean, this is some hardcore stuff that people are putting on each other. And, it's like you're trying to live down something that you haven't done. And that's really hard to do, because how do you live down something you haven't done? It's really challenging. And I find that it's really hard to do. And that's why it's important to sit there and go, okay, if this is happening to you in a relationship, how long has it been going on? How long has the forever ammunition been there? How long has this argument been there? How long has this been the wedge in the relationship? Because it's a mighty big wedge. It's a huge wedge. How long has the wedge been there? And then how long have you been dealing with this wedge, especially these wedges that aren't true? How long have you been dealing with it? How long have you been fighting for it? For many of you, you might be fighting to see your children from the previous marriage with your current spouse. I need to go see them. Or you're always seeing them, so you're having to fight to get out there and see the kids. You're having to fight and having to defend the fact that you had to pay for school supplies. You're having to defend the fact that you had to buy them school clothes. I mean, how long do you have to defend, and how long are you willing to defend something like this over a period of time? And I don't know about you, but eventually even the best people in the world, they get beaten down, over time. And it's just depending on how long you feel like you can deal with this and allow this to be, how long you feel like you can continue to do this and hang in there. And you got to really think about that, because each time that you're trying to defend yourself against something that's, one, not true, or something that they knew was a given situation when they got into the relationship with you, as far as like having kids from a previous marriage, or, having an ex that you have to talk to because you have custody stuff. I mean, all those things, they went into it knowing full and well that this was part of the package. And then when that stuff starts getting questioned and you start getting called on the carpet for that, these are the things that can really break someone, because it just gets really challenging over time and frustrating, because it doesn't seem like there's ever going to be an end in sight. And that's what's so, I think, challenging when we're dealing with the forever ammunition. And that's why I think is really challenging, is that when is it ever going to end? How is it ever going to end? Will this ever go away? And that's what you have to ask yourself. That's what you have to think about. And, when you think about the forever ammunition, too, it's like, we have to get right with that. So if somebody's using forever ammunition against you and it's still triggering you, how bad are the triggers? And what does it trigger? Why is it triggering you so much? So that's a big question. It's like, because if it's triggering you, why? And if it's based on something you didn't do, is it because you want to prove your innocence? Is it because you get tired of being controlled or manipulated? Is it an anger because of the resentment toward the gaslighting? Is it the fact that there's part of it that you started believing because of the way that they treat you and how they address you and the way that they label you? All these are interesting questions, but we can't end a trigger until we know why we're being triggered. We can't stop being triggered unless we know why we're being triggered. And this is so important to understand, is like how and why we're being triggered. And if we can start getting down to the bottom of that, we can start analyzing and understanding better what makes us tick, because that's what it's all about. And one thing that I've realized is that when somebody is driving a wedge in there, when you try to call it out, it can be challenging. And it's hard to call it out because, remember, if somebody doesn't realize that they're actually doing it, they're going to defend it. If they don't really actually know that they're doing it or want to see that they're doing it, they're going to want to defend it at all costs. And that defense is really challenging, right? So the defense of it is what is really challenging. And that's what I want you to really kind of think about too, is that, are we finding ourselves, in this constant defense mode where we can't stop defending ourselves? And that's a part of it. That can be part of it, where we're trying to defend ourselves. We're trying to, go through that, and that's beating us down. That's beating us down mentally, emotionally. It's beating our morale down as well. And those are things that we have to think about too, is the ultimate impact that we're going to have from this exposure over a period of time. And that's something that we have to address and understand, quite honestly, how we're dealing with it and the impact that it has on us. And these are important things to think about. I feel that with the forever ammunition, if you're dealing with that, you can honestly understand if you're in the process of dealing with this forever ammunition right now, this is something that we need to look at. This is something that we need to understand. And so whether it's a situation that took place years ago, or something that they thought you said, or something they thought you did, especially if it's something that didn't happen, and that's one of the hardest things to get over, is you're fighting something that didn't really take place. And that in and of itself is very challenging, it's very overwhelming, and it's very tough to tackle. So stay tuned. When I return, I'm giving you some tips and tricks on how to deal with this, and some ideas that may be helpful to you if you're going through this. So stay tuned. Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I'm exploring the concept of the wedge in a relationship. The wedge can be in the form of a person, or a pet, or a previous relationship, or a previous partner, or previous spouse. It can also be in the form of health issues in order to create that wedge so that there's that physical wedge, and then that wedge can create and mutate into different things. We also talked about the other options, but also as well as the forever ammunition, the things that took place years ago that you seem to not be able to live down, those things, those stories, those comments that are used to create the effect of no solution, even though when we're trying to get solution in a situation. So it creates that circular logic where we're stuck not being able to explore solution, and in fact, we're trying to defend. And so, if you're listening to this show and you're dealing with this, if you have a relationship and there's a wedge in between it, who's put the wedge in? Where did the wedge come from? How did it start? Where are we at? And, can we have that conversation? Can we begin to explore that with the person in the relationship? And it takes time. It's not like a one-time conversation where we talk about it. It's over time. It's like, you bring it up slowly, you bring up different facets. If it's a past story, many of you are not going to be able to live this down. And it's unfortunate because this has been made by this person, I think consciously or subconsciously, to always create emotional distance from you so that they don't have to get connected. And they use this to also paint you black. And they also use this to bring you down to size. And so all these things are very interesting. And if you're dealing with something like that and you want to talk to me, you can definitely reach out at any time. You can go to my website at Ashley Burgess, AshleyBerges.com. There's a contact page. You can send me an email, and I'd love to address some of your questions via email if you're going through this, because it's very challenging to understand. And eventually, at some point in time, we have to figure out how much longer do we have to defend ourselves. Are we tired of defending ourselves? Where is there other places that we can use our energy? Is there other forms of using our energy for good instead of what we're using our energy for? And these are things that we all have to think about individually. It's not one size fits all, but there comes a time in life where we have to realize that, if we are unhappy and things are not working out, how much longer are we willing to deal with this unhappiness? And then how much energy are we willing to keep throwing out this to try to make it work if it hasn't been working for a long time? But we definitely want to explore. We definitely want to, uncover everything. We want to move every rock. We want to look under it. And that's what I help clients do, so that there's no regret at all coming out of that situation. We want to have no regret. We want to have no regret. We want to also eliminate our resentment, and we want to eliminate our triggers, and those are things that I help clients do. If you haven't already, check out my YouTube channel. Go on and subscribe. Go to YouTube and search up Ashley Burgess, AshleyBerges. Just search up my name and then check it out. You can subscribe right there. It'll let you know when we get new videos up, and it's not all the time, so you're going to get an indicator maybe once a week, so it's not going to irritate you, maybe twice a week. But you'll be able to be abreast of what's going on, and new video content up every single week. And we also have a members app. We also have a membership site part on the YouTube as well. You can also become an exclusive member of our website, AshleyBurgess.com. On that front page, you can click on that top banner, and you have access to not only, exclusive videos, but you also have, access to me, exclusive coaching group sessions that take place every month. So check that out if you can. And in the meantime, if you're going through this, remember, it's like the wedge, the narrative, the forever ammunition, the triggers, the defense, the fighting against the narrative. All these things are very challenging. And if you're there in a situation right now, we really need to analyze how we're going to get through it, how we're going to move on, and how we're going to take care of ourselves in this type of landscape. And it comes down to being able to look at ourselves and realize that our purpose is to find ourselves. Our purpose is to understand ourselves, and our purpose is to be better than we were yesterday. And all of these things are extremely important, but the purpose is about understanding ourselves and eventually having that unconditional love for ourselves. And once we get to that unconditional love state, we wouldn't accept this type of behavior in our life. So that's another thing that I work with clients to do. It takes a little time, but it is so incredibly worth it, because that's the reason why you're here. Well, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you. Check out the podcast. You go to Spreaker, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify. Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. You know it. I'll be back next week. If you have some show ideas, go to that contact page and send me an email on ashleyburgess.com. Live Your True Life Perspectives will be back this time in 3 shakes.